Hello out there in podcast land. This is Tammy Terrell, Texas Desert Rose, coming to you for our third episode of general mental health topics, coming to you from Bahrain, the land of sand. We are bordering with Saudi Arabia, and about an hour's flight from Dubai. So, great place to visit if we ever do get to fly in a plane and come visit. I highly recommend this area, very different than what I had been told where I'm from. And U.S. in general, we need to work on the image here in the Middle East. Hopefully in the works. So you hear me mention it a lot, that's why. And as you may already know, I'm from a little town, big city, Denton, Texas, 30 miles north of Dallas, Fort Worth. About 30 miles from the Oklahoma border. So just to give you an idea, great little city, 3 universities most people have just driven through there. But hello out there in Denton. So we're going to cover a couple of topics today and just some things that I find interesting. I'm hoping you do too. So, and also please go to my Facebook page, Texas Desert Rose, and consider liking, following, whatever the jargon is, and love to hear from you, get some feedback, any kind of topics you'd like to have covered. I am a licensed professional counselor, a supervisor, a bunch of credentials I've done it for quite a long time, 25 years. Got an office with amazing therapists there in Denton, and I'm working here in Bahrain. Love this country, or kingdom, as it were. And about to take another trip home in May. We're going to see my son graduate. Excited about that. Need to touch home for a little bit. Hopefully that flight will be able to happen. So, okay. So our topic today is we're going to talk about the introverted versus the extroverted lifestyle. And after that, we're going to dive a little bit into imposter syndrome. Things that, a syndrome you may or may not have heard about, but we're going to go into it a little bit more. So first, introversion versus extroversion. First, know that it's not an extreme where no one's completely introverted or completely extroverted, okay? We're along the spectrum as measured by the Myers-Briggs type indicator or the Kersey. And Kersey was actually first, but it's kind of a Coke and Pepsi kind of battle between the two of them, as far as I can tell. But they both recognize and measure introversion, extroversion, okay? It's hard to believe now, but introversion was once a mostly misunderstood personality trait. Now it's countless books and articles, podcasts, videos, YouTubes, and here's another one. But in general, psychologist Jonathan Cheek began to notice something, and that's the way that many introverts define the trait was different from the way a lot of academic colleagues did. Well, you probably don't care anything about that. You want to know, hey, let's talk about introversion, extroversion. I think I know what I am, but I want to make sure. Okay, so we're going to do that. If you ask somebody on the street and ask them to define introversion, well, if they'll come up as the prototypical characteristics are thoughtful or introspective, a lot of people believe it's actually being shy. But as we'll hear there, it isn't necessarily being shy. So in the literature, would you be surprised to know that 40% of our population is considered to be introverts? It's just that the extroverts are the loudest ones, and I'm one of them. So no shade to extroverts, but 40% of the population, okay? An introvert is usually defined by what it is not, extroverts by what they are. So if extroverts are assertive and enthusiastic individuals who thrive in highly stimulating social environments, then introverts are the opposite. or so the academics' way of thinking about it goes. And many introverts agree with this. They feel like they're outnumbered, that what they have to say isn't really heard. That's why I'm bringing this to the forefront. I want to talk more about that. That's part of our problem overall. According to Myers-Briggs, the main difference between introversion and extroversion is introverts must think before they converse or process. Extroverts have to converse in order to think. Okay, so let's say that again. If you hold an extrovert's mouth, they cannot think. I can't tell you how many times I have called a friend or called my colleague there at the office and said, hey, let me just talk because I've got to figure this out. Literally, moving mouth makes brain work. Okay? Well, for an introvert, that's not the case. Introverts actually think before they can talk. And they may not ever talk. They don't have to process. They don't have to talk. But they have to think before they're able to do that. Having said that, keep in mind that we're all very much alike. The difference is introverts get their energy by being alone. Extroverts, we get our energy by being around others. But we all have our levels of this. No one's extreme extrovert. No one's extreme introvert. In fact, on the Myers-Briggs and the Kersey, I test to be pretty extreme extrovert, but I have to have my space and my time alone to process. Something else to keep in mind is that whenever we're under stress, extroverts and introverts go to our opposite. So, when under stress, an introvert is more likely to talk, or if they're going to talk, it's usually when they're having to play the role or they're stressed out. Whereas extroverts, we will start to shut down and process internally when we're extremely stressed. I definitely identify with that. How about you? Okay, so let's see. So no one's a one-size-fits-all area of this, okay? And why am I doing this? Because I feel like introverts kind of get the raw end of the deal. I think a lot of times they are not understood, sometimes not heard because they're not going to be the loudest, they're not going to jump in there. I just want to have an increased understanding of extroverts, introverts, okay? So there are actually different types of introverts. We've got the social introvert, the thinking introvert, the anxious introvert, and the restrained introvert. And of course, as you can guess, we're going to go into each of these, okay? Was it Dr. Cheek did a survey of 500 adults ranging from age 18 to 70, so a huge span of age, and asking them things like their preference for solitude, how inclined they are to daydream. And the uniting principle of all four kinds of these introverts that we listed is a tendency to turn inward rather than outward. An introvert will rely upon themselves to make decisions. Extroverts look to external sources to determine their decisions, to see how to behave or act. And this is absolutely true. In a new situation, I can tell you in every case, I will look around to see what I should be doing if I'm unsure. Introvert's not going to do that. An extrovert is more likely to say, does that make sense? Or an extrovert will say, well, what do you think? Or what are we supposed to be doing right now? Now, an introvert's going to be asking more factual questions like, is there a better way to do it? To make things a little bit more complicated, let's look at the types of introverts. Social introvert is the typical definition of introversion in that a preference for socializing with small groups instead of large ones, or sometimes it's a preference for no group at all. You introverts get what I'm saying. Solitude is often preferable for those who score high in social introversion. They prefer to be at home with a book or a computer, or all of the above, or stick to small gatherings with close friends. And even then, it's going to take them gearing up and getting the energy to go to that. And often will take their own vehicle so that they can leave when they start to get depleted energetically, okay? This is different, though, from shyness, in that there's no anxiety driving the preference for solitude or small groups. It's just how they process best. Whereas shyness involves a lot of anxiety and negative thinking in many cases. Okay? So let's talk about, in general, the need to keep the groups small for an introvert. Here's why. An introvert, okay, first, extroverts, whenever we're communicating, I'll hear something and I'll just respond. I don't need to think about it. I don't have to be right. I can just put it out there, and if it's not correct, the other person will correct me, and we'll go back and forth, and that's communication for an extrovert. However, for an introvert, what they do is they take the information in, process it through their brain, because remember, introverts need to process before talking, and then they'll say things out loud. They'll respond. That's a whole lot more energy than the extrovert who's simply just responding to what they've been told. So that's why your typical introvert, especially extreme, they're going to get exhausted much faster because communication's overwhelming. And that's if anxiety is not a part of the picture at all. If it is, it's even more exhausting. Okay? Second type of introvert, the thinking introvert. This one's kind of a newer concept. People with high levels of thinking introversion don't share the aversion to social events that people usually associate with introversion. Instead, this style of introversion just means a person tends to be introspective, thoughtful, self-reflective in their head. They are very capable of getting lost in an internal fantasy world, but it's not in a neurotic way. It's in an imaginative, creative way. It's actually kind of nice. So they will go to social events, prefer it to be smaller, but you might see them over in the corner processing their thoughts, but not really averse to going to a social gathering. Okay. Third type of introvert is the anxious introvert, and this is what we often think of with introverts. But it's only one of the four. Anxious introverts seek out solitude because they feel awkward or self-conscious around other people, because they're not feeling very confident in their own social skills. See? And really, this can come in extroverts too, but it's just more likely to be introverts. Their anxiety doesn't fade when they're alone even. This kind of introversion is defined by the tendency to ruminate, to go over and over thoughts in their minds about things that they could have done, should have done, didn't do, that they feel like have gone horribly awry. Now, a lot of that's not based on fact. It's just they're going over and over the thoughts. It becomes bigger and bigger and bigger. It can be very difficult. The fourth kind is the restrained introvert, or the reserved introvert, if you will. Restrained introverts prefer to think before they speak or act. They take a while to get going. For example, they can't just jump up in the morning and immediately get to going. They have to have their time to slowly wake up, get their thoughts together, get their life in order. Okay? So ask yourself, if you're an introvert, which of those four do you identify with? Okay? Dr. Dan McAdams described extroversion, introversion as a continuous dimension. There are no pure types in psychology, as we've said before. Just like with height and weight or any of the other things that describe people, we're not all or the other. It tends to follow the bell-shaped curve, the confidence interval, if you have taken statistics. So that's about 78-80% are falling in the middle of that extreme. And so, again, if you're interested in the Myers-Briggs type indicator would like to take it and see your